All right, so I'd like to thank you for joining me. For the first part, can you please explain a little bit about yourself for those who don't know who you are?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm Gary Simons. I am a stand-up comedian. I think the way that you know me is that I opened for Mike Birbiglia on tour, and so you saw me at the Chicago Theater. But outside of stand-up, I also do sketches and a little bit of improv. And if you're watching this, if I look slightly sweaty, my room is just very warm right now, and I didn't want the sound of the fan to blow us out. So if I'm sweating, it's not because I'm nervous. It is because I am slowly melting.
That's all right. And so, what made you want to become a comedian? I feel like that's such a cool job. So, what made you want to comedy?
Yeah, no, I remember it's interesting. It was a slow burn. I didn't immediately think I wanted to be a comedian. For since I was like 7 years old through like college, like up until college, I thought I was gonna be a doctor. Like I really wanted to be a doctor. But I always loved comedy. I remember middle school is when Kevin Hart's Seriously Funny special came out, and it was so good. It was quotable. Like I remember that was when like YouTube, like you'd find like full specials on YouTube that were just like illegally put up there, and you would watch the special and be like, "Oh my gosh, this is so funny." We were quoted back to each other, like in school, and I remember just really liking comedy from that, but I didn't know how you go about it. And it wasn't really until college when I joined my college's improv team that I realized that like, oh, there's a path to like becoming a comedian as like a career. That I was like, I think I'm actually interested in this.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, was there ever a point in your career that you felt like quitting, and how did you overcome it?
I mean, I still feel early in my career. Not that's not to say that I think I'll quit, but I think that it's never I don't think there are moments where you feel doubt or you question what you're doing or what your motives are. But I think the closest that I ever came to quitting um was probably in the beginning phase of like move finishing college and then moving to New York. I was working a job in insurance, and it was just becoming like really hard to balance both jobs, both career choices, and um and I think the way that I overcame it was just kind of I think a lot of what stand up in an art form where you're constantly putting yourself out there to be like judged or evaluated. I think the way you get past that is kind of like pushing through. It's through like repetition. It's through the amount of reps you've done where it's like every comedian you can look at and be like, oh wow, they've just been doing it so much that now a bad show doesn't really get to them. Now like this type of thing doesn't get to them. They just do it for the reps. They're learning on a different level.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, who inspired you the most when you wanted to become a comedian? Like when you were first starting out, who was your biggest inspiration?
Um, I think when I was in middle school, Kevin Hart was like the kind of only person I knew as a comedian out there. Just like it, I didn't really understand comedy all that much. And then I remember after that, like I realized like Eddie Murphy was a comedian. I was realizing that there were a lot of stars that I always appreciated. Like Eddie Murphy's Daddy Daycare was like came out when I was like 5, so like that was a movie I could watch, and I was like, oh wait, this guy was a stand-up comedian. This guy was on SNL. Like I had no idea that these were things about him. And I think like a lot of comedians like Kevin Hart, Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy were definitely big inspirations for like why I thought like, oh, I can actually do this. And like I want to make people laugh and feel I want to make my parents laugh because like those are the comedians that made my parents laugh.
That's awesome. And so as you mentioned earlier, you work with Mike Birbiglia. How did you meet Mike, and when did you start working together?
Yeah, so Mike Birbiglia went to the same college that I went to, so we both went to Georgetown. That said, I went to Georgetown like 23 years after he graduated, so not at the same time at all. But he did improv at college, and he also did stand up. And the improv team he was on in college is the same improv team I was on when I was a student, as well as he won a stand up competition that I won when I was a senior called Funniest Human on campus. And after I won it, I won tickets to a show. And so I reached out to him on Instagram. I was like, hey, I won tickets to your show. Like, I'm interested in doing comedy outside of college, like very excited to see the show. And then he like followed me back. And then I just kept posting like a lot of the comedy stuff I was doing after graduating. And after a while, like um, I think I had gotten his email and I had reached out to him just saying like, hey, I'm still in New York. I would love to like any advice you have and stuff like that. And we grabbed coffee. Um, and um, and I told him I was working in insurance and that I wasn't really trying to do that anymore. And he offered me like a part-time role, kind of working for the company. And then that turned into a full-time role. And then like a year into working at the company, he asked to see some of my set because he knew I did comedy stand-up. And he watched it, he gave me some feedback, and then he was like, "Do you want to open for me on these shows, at like small clubs?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah, of course." And then he kind of gave me like feedback and advice that helped me like and grow and improve to the point where he's kept me on the road with him so far. So that's kind of like how we got connected and I started opening for him.
That's awesome. It's crazy how you go from a small club to a venue so big like the Chicago Theater. It's huge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
It
know.
was absurd.
And so what has been your favorite place to perform, and where are you looking forward the most to perform at?
I mean, I mean, I think the thing I'm very grateful for with opening for Mike is like, I've had the opportunity to go to a lot of places I've never been to before. So like, not just like, oh, is that my first time performing in a city? It's like my first time there ever. And so it's almost like every city becomes like my favorite. It sounds like a not real answer, but every city becomes my favorite place to perform because it's like, I'm just so grateful that I'm able to like talk and connect with people in this location that I've never like, that I wouldn't have thought like my material could connect with necessarily, or I thought I'd ever be able to be there and enjoy that place. So like every place has been really cool. I mean, Chicago theater is gorgeous, so I think that was definitely one of my favorite theaters to like just be inside of and like look at. And I almost feel like every theater holds like a certain place in my like heart as like one like as like the first place that I performed at in that city. So like it's been cool. In terms of where I'm excited to perform, um, I think I'm excited to like we're gonna be doing Toronto, Canada in a few weeks. Like it's a tour of like northern New York or upstate New York and then Toronto. And I'd been to Canada 2 times before, but I've never been to Toronto, and so I'm excited to check that out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was the recent visit in Chicago your first time in Chicago?
So I technically on stage said this is my first time in Chicago. It's only my second time in Chicago, but I felt that I could connect with the audience more if they felt like this is my very first time here. As like, oh, this guy's new, exciting. It was my first time performing in Chicago as a stand-up comedian. And the other time I was there was for even a shorter period of time. I think I was there for like arguably like a day.
That's awesome. And so, uh, throughout your set, you tell a few stories from overreacting to meeting another African American in
Yeah,
Connecticut.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
how do you turn a story into part of your set?
Yeah, um so I think that a lot of it is it's a bit of so the process of like stand up, and I think Mike will also explains this on his podcast, Working It Out, where it's a bit of like when you're starting out, you're focused on like getting 5 minutes, and then you want to, if 5 minutes that works anywhere, and then you want to get 10 minutes that work anywhere, and then 15 minutes that work anywhere. And the way you go about getting 5 minutes that work anywhere is you go to open mics and you try new material and and then you focus on the things that work in that new material you're trying and expand on that and then see what works in that, trim down, expand, blah, 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 until you get to the 5 minutes of like, oh, this is like solid 5 minutes, it works anywhere. Now, where like, how do you decide or how do you put a story into your set is you take something, it could have been anything, it could feel like it's mundane, but if you think that there's something like funny or unusual about that, that like you have a perspective or take on, like for me, like for example like like the overthinking or the fries joke is like I was looking at myself like eating fries and thinking about like the idea of like do they actually want me to have fries or not, and I was like, oh, I think there's something funny here. I'm just gonna take this to an open mic. I'm gonna try it, and that's like okay, that's kind of connecting with people. And then it's like, all right, well, this part of it seems like it's connecting with people the most. Let me expand on that. And like, let me add these other details of this story. Let me try and make this funnier. And then it's like, okay, that's pretty good. Sorry. And then that's like, oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty funny. Let me try now that it's working in this place. Let me see if I'll put this in my 15-minute set with Mike because those are like that's like the set that's got to work everywhere because that's a lot of people are watching you. It's important to do well. And then it's like, well, it's been doing well enough that I think it's worth it to put into like my 15-minute set. So like that's somewhat my process is I take an idea, a story that happens. I'll take that to open mics, which are a lot lower stakes. It's a lot of just trying new material until I feel like that material is pretty strong. And then I'll take that into the mic shows and try it there and keep improving it.
Yeah, that's great. And so, as a comedian, do you ever change a story a little bit to make it funnier for the crowd?
Yeah, I think I do that. I think a lot of comedians do that. I do think that comedians have different boundaries of like bounds to which they keep the truthfulness of their story. Like some people are feel very open to like change a story to make it funnier or to send a certain message. Some people feel like they can only change it so much. For me, I think if I'm not putting words into someone's mouth that makes them seem like disingenuous to the actual type of person I think they are, like if I'm not doing that, I think it's okay. I think um if I if like my reaction is like honest or like is a perspective that I feel, then I think it's okay. But I do sometimes embellish a story, um, trying to think, for example, like the WikiHow story that I tell. There's a part where I say, so it's very true that I was sitting on the couch with a woman that I had a crush on, and I three finger swipe up, and the WikiHow is on the screen, and that there is an image, and there is an image of two people sitting on a couch, right? But then the part where that starts to get embellished is that it's like it's not two people looking at a computer screen and it's not two people who are also watching Friends, and it doesn't have a tab middle point that says like is Burt Reynolds in Friends. Like that's the part where I start to exaggerate because it's funny because it's like I'm leaning into the truth of like it is usually such an accurate picture that it feels like it might as well have been all of those other things. And then it leads to the truthful discovery of like Burt Reynolds is not in Friends, it's Tom Selleck, but they look so much alike.
Yeah, that's hilarious. And so this question wasn't on, but on the email I sent you, but is there a joke in your set that you absolutely love to tell?
I love telling the overthinker joke. That joke technically went pretty viral on my Instagram when I posted it, but it's one of those things where it's like most of those people probably aren't people who come to live shows, so it doesn't feel like I'm telling people who've heard it before. But it is one of my favorite jokes because the way that I connect with audience members that overthink, like people who are overthinking things, like they hear that and they feel so seen because it's really the feeling of like your least favorite thing as an overthinker is someone telling you you're overthinking it because that's essentially that person telling you that like you don't realize you haven't thought about this enough to consider that you might have thought about this too much. I was like, that is the first that's insulting to think that I haven't thought that I'm overthinking it. I don't need your underthinking thoughts. That feeling.
That's awesome. And so, what advice would you give to your younger self if you had the chance?
I think one of the things I would say is like keep when I was in college is when I really started writing stand-up material jokes, and I had a rule for myself that I had to write a joke or something funny every day. Like I had to write it down in my journal, which forced me in the beginning to be like I'd wait like before I go to sleep I'd have to write something about it and write it in a day, and it started getting my brain so the juice is flowing so much that I then would just be like in class thinking of something funny. I'd write that down. I'd do this, write that down. And I think, and it's not that I've stopped doing that, but I feel like explaining to myself then the importance of why you're doing that and how like it starts to become like an archive that you can look back at. And even if you don't have the funny turn or spin at it that moment, you can look back at that and be like, oh, that was a true observation or that was a feeling I had. And 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 I think if I explained that to myself then, I would have probably been able to like really improve. And I think I would have just told myself like it's not that it's not as big of a deal as you think it is. Like I used to think like when I got up on the stage and held a microphone that like this was like if I don't do this well, like this could be the moment I break. Like I could become like huge. And it's like no individual show matters. Mike sometimes says he's like every show is just a rehearsal for the next show. So if it's just a rehearsal, then you're just only trying to get better.
That's great. And so this next question ties into the last one. What advice would you give to younger kids who want to become comedians?
Yeah. Well, I'd say if you're in college or pre-college, I did I do comedy. I finished college. Some people when they go into the arts or do other careers, they might not feel like they need to finish. I felt like one of the benefits of me going through all of that was that like I think I gained other skills beyond just comedy that help influence the comedy. Like I think like comedy comes from like is like a mindset that you then put on to like other information. So like I studied psychology, I was a psychology major, and I have that information in my brain and I'm able to like utilize that in my comedy or I'm able to give that perspective. So I think my the two big advice would be one is to like learn other things. Like don't just if you're interested in comedy, don't just focus on comedy. Like yes, do comedy, but don't like also engage other skills because you'll get to a point where you'll kind of wish you had kept up with certain skills. Like I wish I had st kept playing saxophone as much as I was playing it in middle school and high school. Because like now it's like, oh, that'd be so funny if I could just like in a show that I'm doing, take on my saxophone and play it. But it's like I'm not as good as I wish I was. And now it's like, oh, I'm trying to relearn it. But it is like oh, if I had just maintained some of those other skills I enjoy doing as well. And I think the second piece of advice is just try things. Don't be afraid. Try things. Like this, doing this podcast is like an example of like you're putting yourself out there, you're trying something, you're improving every single time you try and you do an episode because you're learning from it. And you hit a point where you're like, okay, I can take this information I've learned and bring it to the next thing, which will make you like even better at whatever that next project is.
That's awesome. And so that actually wraps up the interview. So I'd like to thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.